It's my birthday and the Packers are going to get a win for me. Maybe. Possibly. I hope so. I think it could be an entertaining Thursday night game, but it's a Thursday night game, so anything goes. We'll find out. Welcome to the Week 4 Fantasy Football Wide Receiver Rankings. My brain's really working at a high gear. It's going to be a long week, fellas and ladies, because I have to rebuild my projections sheets, which I'm not going to quite rebuild them to the complexity that they were originally built, but things happen, so unfortunately I don't have projections for you like I've been talking about so far up until this point in the season. If you want to see what those look like, I do have the quarterback projections up on the website. There's floors, there's ceilings, and there's expected ranges. So those are available for the quarterback position. You can also watch the quarterback video. And all of these rankings, including the full set of wide receiver rankings, are available up on the website at www.theffforge.com. There's a link down in the description to find those. And I do say full set because we will only be going through the top 38 wide receivers in this video. We'll be going through them in tiers. And just before I forget, over on the far right-hand side here, the ECR difference. That is the difference between myself and the expert consensus ranking from Fantasy Pros website. It's just an average of several different experts. That's as of Wednesday, noonish time. If it's a positive number, that means that I was above the ECR. Negative number means that I'm below the ECR. And my tight end rankings won't be out until Friday. So Thursday night, I think they're both essentially must starts. The Detroit is a really, really good matchup for tight ends so far this season. And we all know about Sam Laporta. So I will say this much. If you have one of them and Mark Andrews, I wouldn't be opposed to starting them over Mark Andrews. I don't quite have it ranked that way. Just went through and did my rankings just so I could see where I had them because I was just wanted to be able to report on those two. But they're both good plays. And welcome into the Fantasy Football Forge. If I didn't introduce myself, my name is Steve. Before we get to the rankings, I just want to quick do a Week 3 recap on my DFS buys that I had, as well as my love'ems and my fade'ems. And you can find my DFS buys for Week 4 at the end of this video, so stay tuned for that. Last week, I said I thought that River Craycraft was an interesting play, but he got injured. And I said, although he'd probably do nothing, that Eric Izukanma, I think maybe I got that right pronunciation-wise, but I thought he was a long shot to play for big tournaments. It didn't work out. You know, that was the expectation that it wouldn't work out, but you never know. And I also thought that Darius Slayton was worth a shot if you wanted a more contrarian play, and that didn't work out either. The targets have been kind of there for him, though, just hasn't broken out yet this season. I also said if you're looking for one of those kind of mid-priced options that I liked George Pickens. Unfortunately, he did not help you with his wide receiver 38 finish on the week. And I felt that Puka Nacua, Nico Collins, were solid options for their price points. Much like Pickens, they didn't really help you win either. Especially Nico Collins. Puka Nacua was closely ranked too. I think he was wide receiver 39 on the week, so at least you would have had more money to spend elsewhere compared to George Pickens if you went that route. For my love'ems, I struck out once, struck out twice, struck out 3 times. Bad form, bad form. It wasn't good. George Pickens, Drake London, and Jordan Addison, none of them ended up coming through for you. And for my fade'ems, my worst fade of the year came through with Mike Williams, and I pretty much retracted that by Saturday. So just a quick public service announcement. It can happen that I will look back at my love'ems or my fade'ems, and I will say, what the heck were you thinking, Steven? So I did not do so well with that pick, even though he got injured. He still had a good day, so clearly he was way wrong there. And the moral of the story for that is just to make sure that you check out the rankings again later on in the week and or come visit me on Sunday, 1 hour prior to kickoff for my where I go live for any start-sit questions, where you can also see my final rankings. I update those up until about 2 hours prior to kickoff on the website, and then I stop updating them on the website, and there will still usually be some last-second updates before going live 1 hour prior to kickoff. And for my other fade'ems, I faded Garrett Wilson and DeAndre Hopkins, which both worked out. So I at least found some success with my fade'ems and my love'ems last week. a little bit of a rough week. Now on to my week 4 rankings, and my first tier here is going to be the must-start guys. We have a good, healthy tier here. I don't think there's going to be too many upsets this week. Things look pretty solid all around, at least for the first several groups, tiers here of wide receivers. So I have Tyreek Hill as my wide receiver 1, Justin Jefferson as my wide receiver 2, followed by Stephon Diggs, Keenan Allen, Jamar Chase, A.J. Brown, Deebo Samuel at my wide receiver 7. And because of where he was drafted and everything, and where I have him ranked, he is a love him for me this week. I felt that I needed to stress how much I think he is a must-start this week going up against Arizona. The Cardinals, as far as I can tell, as far as I'm aware, they play a lot of zone defense to just kind of keep teams from absolutely murdering them. And Deebo should be able to absolutely eat that up. Then I have Devontae Adams in that wide receiver 8, CeeDee Lamb, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Chris Olave, Devonta Smith, and Jalen Waddle to wrap that tier up. One quick note on Devontae Adams. If Jimmy G were playing, he would have been my number 1 ranked wide receiver this week. Unfortunately, that probably won't be the case, and Jacoby Myers would have been a top 20 play for me, but unfortunately for him, also probably not going to end up being the case. I think they're going to have a rookie quarterback out there this week too, so questionable. Moving on to tier 2, and these are my less confident, but still essentially must-start guys. Going from my wide receiver 14 to wide receiver 20, starting off with Amari Cooper at 14, followed by Puka Nacua, DK Metcalf, Mike Evans, Michael Pittman Jr., Calvin Ridley, and T. Higgins. As far as Amari Cooper, above Puka Nacua and DK Metcalf, as you can see, do have them a little bit higher than the, both of them would be higher according to the ECR, the experts so far. And Baltimore has allowed about the same amount of fantasy points per week to receivers as Indianapolis has. So Baltimore going up against, Amari Cooper going up against Baltimore, and Puka going up against Indianapolis. So that's pretty much a tie there. And then I'm not saying that the Giants' defense, who DK Metcalf is going up against, is going to be frightening teams or anything like that, frightening me. But teams have largely been able to run against them a lot, so I'm expecting quite potentially a limited game for these Seattle receivers is what it boils down to. I'm taking the talent/experience of Amari over Puka, and I'm taking the matchup of Amari over DK's matchup is really what it breaks down to. And as far as DK Metcalf, you see an orange color there because he's not a love him, he's not a hate him. This is a new category. It's not really a new category, but it's something I'm just doing this week. It's a love-hate, but really a love-fade here for the Seattle wide receivers. It's the duo of both DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett. Love them, fade them. I don't know which one to love and which one to fade. I think that there's a pretty decent chance that only one of them comes through this week. Metcalf has yet to score below 10 fantasy points, so obviously he is the nice, solid, safe option here. But I think that run game's going to be going pretty well for Seattle. It depends how the New York Giants offense does against the Seattle defense for how this game turns out. There's also a chance that this could be a pretty high-scoring affair. Who knows what will end up happening. Then I have a fade on Mike Evans this week, but as you can see, I'm actually higher on him than the ECR as well, so we will get to the reason for that fade. But this is not the best matchup going up against New Orleans, but Mike Evans had 3 pretty big drops last week, and even still, he's been a top 5 wide receiver so far this season without having caught those balls that would have added a lot of fantasy points to him. There is no way that I'm sitting Mike Evans this week, and there's more to come on this in regards to what my concern is for Mike Evans when I talk about Chris Godwin, and then I will cover exactly why Mike Evans is a fade for me. But I repeat, I'm not sitting him. What I am possibly doing, if the situation works out like this, is that essentially if I have 2 players, one with a high floor but not so much of a ceiling, and one with a high ceiling and not so much of a safe floor, then I'm going to go with that high ceiling guy, assuming that those 2 are relatively, equally ranked. That's all that is just kind of maybe plan on being a little bit disappointed or a lot disappointed from Mike Evans this week. We'll get back to that in a moment. Let's move on to my third tier of receivers. And these are guys that I'm optimistic about this week. Starting off at wide receiver 21, we have Tyler Lockett, followed by Brandon Ayuk, Nico Collins, George Pickens, and Christian Kirk to wrap that up at wide receiver 25. Nice little tier here. I like these guys. As far as Brandon Ayuk versus Tyler Lockett go, I was planning on playing. I have both of them on my fantasy team, and I was planning on playing Ayuk over Lockett coming into these rankings and doing them. But the matchups are about equal for both of them so far this season as far as fantasy points allowed to the wide receiver position. And ultimately, which game do I think has a higher chance of becoming a back and forth game? It still is going to be the Seattle versus the New York Giants game. I really have a tough time imagining that San Francisco-Arizona game being coming down to the wire or anything like that. So I gave the edge to Tyler Lockett between the two of them. Then another little head-to-head decision here with Nico Collins and George Pickens for me. Once you can see over here, I have Nico higher than the ECR, George Pickens lower than the ECR. And this is a little bit, perception might be going into some people's decisions here because you think of Houston offense and Pittsburgh defense versus, Pittsburgh offense and Houston defense. Well, Pittsburgh has been a top 5 matchup for fantasy points allowed to receivers so far this season, and Houston is ranked 23rd in that same category. So it's kind of flipped compared to what your typical perception would be. And I understand that it would be awfully tough to play Nico Collins over George Pickens. Believe me, I get it. It's tough to do it, but I do softly recommend it. They're very, very close to one another. Then I have Christian Kirk to wrap that up, and Zay Jones is unlikely to play again, which would help him out a lot. And that's going to bring us to Tier 4, which is less so I'm optimistic, but I'm hopeful for these guys. Starting off at wide receiver 26, we have Zay Flowers, followed by Tutu Atwell, Chris Godwin, Jerry Jeudy, and Christian Watson to wrap this little tier up. And as far as Tutu Atwell goes, it's one of the better matchups for receivers so far this season, going up against Indianapolis, and Kupp is not back yet. So I think we get another week of good Tutu Atwell. They have been manufacturing touches for Tutu, and they need to take a few deep shots to him, and they've been connecting on those against every defense that they face in order to keep those defenses honest and open things up for Puka and that running game. So I think that he's in a good situation to yet again have a good week. He has been a top 10 wide receiver so far on the season. Then we go to Chris Godwin. Has not been a good start for him in fantasy. He will have better games this season, but the Baker connection is clearly with Mike Evans, and this is not a great matchup this week going up against New Orleans. However, on the positive side of things for Chris Godwin, and why essentially the only reason why I don't have a fatum on him here is that Marshawn Lattimore and Mike Evans have a history. And it wouldn't be the first time that Mike Evans got ejected for fighting if that were to happen over this weekend. In addition, Marshawn has had the Mike Evans number several times when he's shadowed him. We expect him to shadow Mike Evans yet again this weekend. And he's had good success with that in the past, so there's always a chance that Mike Evans might get shut down this weekend, in which case you would expect Chris Godwin will probably have a decent enough day then. And so if it wasn't clear, that is why I have the fade on Mike Evans. That was where my concern for Mike Evans comes from this week. And that's going to bring us to our final tier here from wide receiver 31 down to 38, starting off with the Jacoby Myers, Adam Thielen, Garrett Wilson, Tank Dell, Jordan Addison, Gabe Davis, Terry McLaurin, and Cortland Sutton. And I'm going to label this tier to ceiling or to floor, because I think that there's a lot of options here where the decision depends upon exactly what you're looking for if you're looking at two of these guys. And that goes a little bit earlier than this as well as a little bit behind this tier. So when we look at Jacoby Myers, my wide receiver 31, he's a risky ceiling play this week. Unless we were to get Jimmy G back, then I like him much, much more. And honestly, I think that I'll end up dropping him further back in the rankings. It's a process for dropping him back this week because his target share, the amount of targets that he's received in his 2 starts this year has been so good. And this is an amazing matchup facing the Los Angeles Chargers. But it's going to be hard to trust him at the same time with probably a rookie quarterback. So what I'm saying is look for Jacoby Myers to probably fall in my rankings as the week goes along. Every time I look at these, maybe I'll just drop him a little bit further backwards. Then Adam Thielen, if Bryce Young does not play this week, I like him this much. It's hard to not love Adam Thielen, especially since he's going up against Minnesota. It's a defense that's allowed the 3rd most points to receivers through the first 3 games, and I don't think that that's a mistake that's happened, so I expect that kind of production for wide receivers against Minnesota to continue. And it's also, there's the Adam Thielen versus Minnesota factor. They're his old team. Then Garrett Wilson I have at wide receiver 33, and I'm pretty darn sure that Kansas City's defense is for real, the real deal. Can't say for 100% sure on that yet, but I like them a lot right now and what we've seen from them. And Garrett Wilson continues to get ranked fairly highly, and that's kind of because we have to at this point in the season, at this point in the process. He did come through for you in 2 out of 3 games so far, but I would be looking to sit him if possible. If you have to play him, he is super talented. They'll have to keep passing in this game, almost certainly against Kansas City, and all it takes is one big play for him. So those are the factors working in favor of him, but he's still a fade for me going up against Kansas City. And that's the third fade in a row for him. I know it's been a little bit boring, but once we can rank him a little bit lower, then I won't need to fade him. That's going to bring us to Tank Dell, my wide receiver 34. It's a good matchup, though it is a risky matchup going up against Pittsburgh. That pass rush could cause issues for Houston, and then who knows what we get from him. But Houston seems to be trusting Tank more and more each week, so look for his success to continue in what has been a good matchup so far for receivers. Jordan Addison up next in my wide receiver rankings, and he didn't live up to my love him last week, but it wasn't without the team trying to get the ball to him. He had the most targets that he's had all season. That's 8 targets last week. And his snap share continues to creep up ever so slightly each and every week. So look for those trends to continue. And then we have Gabe Davis, and he's a big-time playmaker going up against Miami in a game where there are going to be, I'm sure, big-time plays, and big-time plays will be asked to be made. So I think the opportunity will most certainly be there this week. It could end up being the best game of the entire season for Gabe Davis if they hit on that a couple of times. So you know what? There we go. We moved him up to my wide receiver 31 at the top of this tier. Really don't want to miss out on a potentially massive game for him, especially when you compare it to all the little question marks going on in this tier. Then we have Terry McLaurin up next in this tier, and I'm not confident about starting him, but it's not as if wide receivers haven't found success against this Philadelphia secondary up until this point in the season, and that's where some of that concern comes in, just like the Pittsburgh concern. That pass rush is so good that maybe these early season results are a little bit skewed to what we should expect for the rest of the season. And then at wide receiver 38, I have Courtland Sutton. He's facing Chicago. I think I skipped over Jared Jeudy. The same thing for him. They're going up against Chicago. It usually hasn't hurt to bet against Chicago and take players going up against them this year. So that is it for my wide receiver rankings. Once again, you can find the full complete rankings up on the website, or you can always just come and visit me 1 hour prior to kickoff on Sunday for any of your start-sit questions and to see my final rankings. You don't need to ask questions. You can just see them right up on the screen there for you if you don't have any questions to ask. So what are my DFS buys this week? Well, at the bottom of the barrel, I've got Wan'Dale Robinson going up against Seattle at 3,000 DK bucks. I really wouldn't use him, though, in a larger tournament because I don't think there's going to be quite enough play for the kind of pop that you would need in a large tournament for him. But I do think that he could still have a very good day, and for that price, maybe you can get yourself some other guys who are going to pop off and just have a really good lineup that in a smaller tournament would have a better chance of winning you the big bucks. Then for $6,100, I think Amari Cooper could definitely come through for you this week, so sit him in your lineups because that mid-price, I think, has not worked for me all season long. And then for a contrarian play, I'm going to go with Jahan Dotson this week at $4,800. I don't think many people are going to be trusting him. I believe there's some people lower price than him, too, that, people aren't going to be picking him. So I like him as a contrarian play going up against Philadelphia. You'll probably want to dial up some big plays. Maybe it happens this week. It's hard to trust him in real life, a weekly season-long fantasy football leagues, but in DFS leagues, I'll take a shot on that, at least in one of my lineups. So thank you very much for stopping on through. Please like, comment, and subscribe, and look for my tight end video Friday morning. Happy birthday to me. Peace out.